All right, class. It is now October 29th. We're getting closer and closer to the end of this thing. But like I promised, we're gonna have a little bit of spooky time this week. I'm sure y'all won't mind that too much. Um, since this is an asynchronous class, some of y'all be watching this weekend, maybe during Halloween. With COVID and all, I'm sure that some of you will not be getting a bunch of visitors. Although who knows? Kids wearing masks anyway, right? Um, so just whenever you do see this, be sure to take it all in, download the PDF that I'll be talking about, and get ready for some continuing conversation next week around Dia de los Muertos. So it's coming, right? All right. So this little mini lecture here is I know some of you are looking at me and just going shaking your head, but I told you we were gonna get into the ooey kukui stuff here. Here we go. So Cannibal Queen, the rise and fall of the matron. Um Story near and dear to my heart, kind of already given you a couple little hints at why that might be, but let's talk about it. So here she is. Queen of Death herself, Lady of Winter, Rosina Krennic. This photo was taken by her sometime in the 40s, right outside of the church there in Ascuas in Averno County. Um, if you've ever driven through that place, you know it's being renovated. All kinds of really great gentrification going on, drawing in a bunch of tourists. But in the 40s, it was recovering from the Great Depression, and it wasn't quite as a happy place. And she does not look like a happy camper, does she? All right, so let's talk about what we think we know. But before we do that, I gotta kind of give you a heads up on where a lot of my information is coming from. So here's the book. You probably heard of it, although some of you weren't born yet when it became something of a phenomenon. But it's Punching Death: How I Survived the Matron by Dr. Ezekiel Gavin. Now, Dr. Ezekiel Gavin, he's got a PhD in psychology and he worked for a time with the FBI, lots of things like that. But his connection to me is that for a while he was a visiting distinguished professor at UT Austin, right in the towards the end rather of my own doctoral studies there. And during that 2008-2009 school year, I had the privilege of taking a class with him and kind of been in his ear and having him be a bit of a mentor to me. So that's where a lot of this kind of interest in his work comes from. Um, he is still considered, although people don't really think about this too much, one of the leading scholars on Texas Hill Country criminal history. Um, he's from Ascuas, from Averno County, and he knows a lot. But he's more popular, and some of you are probably already shaking your heads or Googling him or whatever for his parapsychological, wow, that's a hard word to say, huh? Parapsychological endeavors as the Sheriff of Hell. Yeah, a whole set of books. Haven't read too many of those. Not really interested in his, um, you know, ghost hunting kind of things, but definitely respect him as a scholar of the criminal history of the Hill Country, especially among the Czech population in that area. And he's graciously sent me a PDF of this book. Now, it's already gone through lots of different iterations. He's got the 35th anniversary edition coming up pretty soon, and I did tell him that I would be, pimping it to y'all and trying to get y'all to buy yourselves a copy of it. But out of, I don't know, great affection for me or whatever, maybe he's a bit of a softie, although it's kind of hard to see. He's let us get a copy of this, and I put it up on Blackboard so you can download it, and that's going to be your principal reading. It's light reading, it's popularization. It's not a scholarly work per se, although it does put forth a lot of the same things that he put out in some of his monographs. And he's in the midst of making a new documentary, so this is just great timing. It's probably be coming out in another year or so. but he's been out and about the hill country filming, and I think he's going to be heading back to Ascuas for the upcoming anniversary of the death of the matron. That's pretty wild. All right, so let's kind of dive into some of the background here. This is you're asking yourself, is this a Texas history class, Dr. Garza? Why are we talking about a serial killer? Well, it's just that her life just happens to be this really interesting intersection of things that I think that if we dig in, it can be really useful and kind of enhance some of the things we've already been talking about over the past few weeks. So, the woman that history now knows as the matron was not from the U.S. at all. She was born in Moravia, which is a region of what's now the Czech Republic, and back then it was a region of Czechoslovakia. You can see that in red right here in the middle, all this area that's in green, different shades of green, is Czechoslovakia in 1928 through 1938. And she was born in this town that's in red, Kyiv, or near it anyway. There are no records that Dr. Gavin could find about her birth available, but and so we don't know her parents' names, but she was very possibly, very likely, from what Gavin was able to determine, named Ruzhina Novakova. 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 The Czech language has this thing where last names have a different variant for a woman than for a man. So that would be like the Novak would be the male last name, and Novakova is the female version of it. Kind of unusual, I know. Um, in late autumn of 1929, five Czech families arrived in Galveston, and we've already talked a lot about Galveston as this center for immigration, kind of like the Ellis Island of Texas. And we've established that Czechs started coming here in the 1850s. And when she was traveling with a particular family, the Janacek family, um, this young Moravian woman was, and she had been issued an immigration visa, and it read Rosina Novak. So Ruzhina was kind of modified to Rosina, which is actually a word in Czech. I asked a couple of my Czech-speaking friends, and they said it means raisin. So from a name that means something like Rose, Ruzhina, to Raisin. I don't know how she felt about that, but I'm not trying to say that her future career as a cannibalistic serial killer came from being called Raisin, but I don't know. Weirder things have happened, right? And she went around saying that she was 18, and that's what was listed on her papers, but she was actually 3.5 years younger than that. She was not quite 15. Now, remember, by this point, Czech immigration to Texas had been going on for 80 years. And so there were about 60,000 Czechs, mainly Moravians and Bohemians, living in our state. And just so you know, today there are about 200,000, mostly in the Hill Country, but it's just the largest Czech American population in the country down here in Texas. So the Janaceks, they headed to Cat Spring in Austin County, like most of these families would, from there to be kind of dispersed out to the different communities. But instead of going to like Fayette County or some of these other like mostly Czech areas that we've discussed, they went further west to Averno County, where a lot of Czechs had kind of settled in and amongst Mexican American families and created the little town of Ascuas. And in that town, Rosina, Ruzhina, it's kind of hard to decide what to call her, the matron, right? Future Miss Matron, um, met this 19-year-old Mexican Czech apprentice blacksmith named Ricardo Krenek Maldonado. Um, by all accounts, I don't have any photos of him that I could show you, but by all accounts, he was a handsome guy, part of an offshoot of the Maldonado clan that was in charge of law enforcement throughout Averno County, and to this day still is really prominent there in politics and in law enforcement. And 6 months later, surprise, surprise, the couple were married. And now, before we start getting our hackles up, these are different times. These are poorer people. I mean, here in the Rio Grande Valley, we have people still getting married at a really young age. It wasn't so unusual. And besides which, she had lied about her age and um, so that she could travel more readily. You know, being a minor made it difficult otherwise. So then, on the heels of their marriage, the Great Depression comes. Mm. With the remaining funds that Rosina has from um, however she got money in the Czech Republic and Czechoslovakia, um, one assumes by selling whatever property some relative have left her, but we just don't know too much about her family or her relatives to be able to be sure. When she used whatever funds she had left and some help from the Krennic clan to buy a plot of land, and there they built a house. There's a parcel of land just east of Ascuas, where our former apprentice and now fully fledged blacksmith, Rick, Krennic, as everybody called him, set up shop. And you might think, well, that's kind of far out of town, but his services were mainly for other farmers. Now, um, Averno County at the time was really well known for its cotton farming, and so there was a lot of need for somebody who could forge new implements or fix them and or shoe horses. There was just a lot of agriculture in the area. Um, but as the drought extended, as the Dust Bowl, pushed into the southern plains, into the Panhandle, and so forth, it did destabilize Texas. Even though perhaps central and southern Texas didn't get impacted as hard, it was still, you know, it's still, a difficult time for everybody. Um, and so as the couple had three kids in succession, Rick Jr., Joseph, Mary Susanna, they found themselves kind of in a bind. Things got really hard. There wasn't the kind of work that they had expected when they set up their little smithy there on their property. And so as a result, Rick Sr., Ricardo, started taking jobs in town, going into town to work for the original blacksmith that he'd been apprenticed to, or to other farmers, just doing things kind of like traveling around. Or so he told his wife. The truth is that he wasn't doing these things. I mean, I know this comes as a surprise that a man would lie to his wife and go off and do something that had nothing to do with what he was supposed to be doing, but there it is. Men sometimes are prone to do these sorts of things, ain't they? And so you see some images of the Krennic house, of the little blacksmith shop. It's decent, buildings for the 30s and sturdy construction. And had the Great Depression not come, then maybe things would have gone well for them. It's really interesting how the ripples of economic uh, downturns can make their way into every nook and cranny of a country, even if it's not directly impacted by some of the things that are causing the economic downturn. So I don't know, I don't know, I shouldn't say poor, but this fool, this Ricardo Krennic Maldonado, yeah, he picked the wrong woman to be lying to and messing around with. By September 1936, it became clear to Rosina that her husband was not going and working, but he was gambling and drinking every day. And sometimes he would win in gambling and have a little bit of money for them, and other times he wouldn't, and he was just drinking most of it away anyway. Um, Dr. Gavin, in his decades of research into this woman, understandably, when you read about it, you'll understand why he became so obsessed with her, was able to glean what her response to this was from different people's letters and journals and interviews with survivors and so forth. At first, Rosina tried running the smithy herself, and she was apparently, pretty good at it. She was sturdy, strong, understood very quickly how to smelt metal and forge things and so forth. But jobs were still few and far between, and not a lot of people wanted to put their faith also in a woman blacksmith. It just seemed counterintuitive to them. So that didn't quite work. She ended up having to hunt and trap whatever game she could. But still her children, were going hungry. They were not getting the nutrition they needed. And we can speculate all day about why Rosina would have just hung in there with this guy. But there were different times a woman couldn't get divorced. It was complicated, right? All kinds of social pressures, making her just have to try to live through it and try to be supportive of him. But whatever, patience and um, humility and love that she might have had for him clearly evaporated when he began to beat her, right? Which, from all accounts, appears to have happened by the end of November 1936, beginning of December of that year. Um, yeah, and it was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? La gota que derramó el vaso. And she was like, I ain't taking this shit no more. Um, by December 22nd, apparently, because this is like the day that it happened, she made the decision to stop him. So she forged an axe, apparently, herself, because it's the same axe that she would use for the next 40 years. And it's a very peculiar axe. Yeah, if you've ever seen it in a Halloween costume or whatever, you'll know the shape. It's that bearded axe, that like little thing hanging down with the strange glyphs carved into the sides of it, right? She forged it herself. You can imagine the intentionality that went into this. And then she killed her husband. She killed Ricardo Krennic in what appears to have been a pagan ritual in honor of Morana, the Slavic goddess of death. And how do we know this? Well, there were all kinds of artifacts discovered near his unmarked grave, including this image that you see here on the screen, the sigil of Morana, which is, like a kind of like a device for calling upon the goddess. And you will notice that the patterns upon it are essentially the patterns on her mask. If you've seen it, not everybody has seen the mask. It was a much more popular at Halloween when I was a kid. I know it's kind of faded, um, you know, 40, what, almost 46 years out from her death. A lot of people have just kind of forgotten that she existed. And but from time to time, you may see it and you not recognize those lines, that very distinguishing pattern. And around it, on the edges, you have these runes are what's called gl glagolitic. I asked my friend over in Literatures and Cultural Studies department to help me pronounce this glagolitic script, which was used for Old Slavic languages, and it reads Zima, Zima, and then Smrt. And Zima means winter, Smrt means death. It's like Smrt, kind of like muerto in Spanish, right? Muerte. Um, Dr. Gavin, because of all of this and because of her subsequent actions, believes that this was probably the first time that she wore that oaken mask that she would then go on to use again and again down the years, and painted white with the red lines in this pattern that you see from the sigil. Um, when his body was exhumed after her death, uh, it was just mostly just articulated bones, and the bones showed signs of having been scraped clean and having all kinds of incisions from a butcher's knife. So the inescapable conclusion, which is borne out from the remains of the other people that were also found on that property, is that, yeah, she hacked her husband up, cooked him, served him to her children. It is gruesome. They were little toddlers at the time. Um, but wow, yeah, what a way to deal with the hunger of your children. Feed them your abusive, drunken husband. Wow. That's one answer, right? You can imagine if that happened today. Somebody like take like one of these superstars that, you know, beats their girlfriends or whatever, and Serve them up. Wow. They were different times, different times. Not to say that cannibalism was like common in the hill country in the 30s or anything like that. I'm not trying to say that at all. Just trying to make light of it because it is disturbing. It's very disturbing. Yeah, yeah. Think on that for a second. Think on the social conditions for a woman at that time and the lack of options for her. They one of the things that we know for sure, and it's, something that I always want to remind people who would restrict a woman's right um, to have a no-fault divorce and all this kind of stuff, is that when it was tough for a woman to get out of a marriage, there were a lot more deaths of men by strange, unknown causes. Yeah, a lot more women kind of feeding rat poison and cyanide to their abusive husbands back then. Really rather not go back to that kind of an age, right? Oh my gosh. And there begins her 40-year reign of terror. And to the right, and it's kind of, I know, disconcerting to me too. It kind of freaks me out. But this is the only photo that was ever taken of the matron. It was taken by accident by some tourists who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I mean, lucky they were in their car when the picture was snapped. And uh, who knows what would have happened if she'd been able to catch up with them. But she, you can kind of sense from this photo that she wasn't very happy about having her picture taken. And I thought that rather than like walking you through the things that happen, you're going to read about them in the book, that I would quote from the prologue to Punching Death, How I Survived the Matron. Here's Dr. Ezekiel Gavin. The remains of 83 people were buried on the Krennic property, many of whom, even a decade later, have yet to be identified. Most, however, proved to be missing persons from the previous 40 years. Parts of them, at least. For Rosina Krennic had been butchering and cooking her victims since the middle of the Great Depression. She began, it appears, with her husband, Ricardo Krennic Maldonado. This is kind of the way he would actually say it. He would try to imitate his voice a little bit. Likely in order to stave off his abuse and her children's hunger. The question remains, why continue for another 4 decades? Theories abound, of course. Research into local victims reveals that many were what Rosina considered bad men. Drunken bon vivants and abusers, cheaters, deadbeats. Not all of them, however. Several young runaways met the blade of her axe, as did multiple beatniks, hippies, hapless addicts, and harmless vagrants. Some people term her a vigilante, applauding her for doing what the law will not, punishing anyone who violates the ancient norms of community and family. But to my mind, one crucial detail undermines that popular fantasy. She ate her victims, fed them to her children, and then to her granddaughter. Such are not the acts of a warrior for justice. Rosina Krennic was a serial killer, one of the most prolific this nation has ever known. It's the way he writes. It's kind of an engaging style, get you caught up in things. I think you'll like it. I think you'll like the book a lot. Well, how did this 40-year reign of terror by the Queen of Death end? Well, in a blaze and then in the water. It's kind of weird to go out in a blaze and then drown. So on February 11th, 1975, Ezekiel Gavin, known to his friends as Zeke, had had just done 1 year at college, just waiting to get into UTSA when they opened up to undergraduates. He was back in Ascuas after serving in the military, and he went with his older brother Richard and Richard's friend Darius Zabka to the Krennic property in hopes of, and this is this foolishness of young men in their 20s who ain't got nothing else to do with their time and live in a small town and maybe drinking too much or whatever, steal money from Rosina Krennic while her adult children were at work. Oh boy, that's right. You pick the home of the prolific serial killer to rob. I just don't. I don't have much to say about that. It's just he goes into detail about what drove them to do that, what motivated them, and you'll find it fascinating. Um, I don't know. We haven't really talked about this, but you'll have noticed on the cover of the book, there's that little sticker that says now a Lifetime original movie. So yeah, in 1987, and you can't. It's not on streaming services, but I think you could find. Um, maybe I shouldn't be like encouraging you to do this, but you can find like bootleg copies of it on YouTube. I think there's the Spanish subtitled version that's there. I really wish Lifetime would re-release it. It's such a goofy ass movie. Oh my God, B. Arthur plays. Yes, no, you don't know who B. Arthur is, do you? Oh my gosh, it's probably you don't. From the Golden Girls. Anyway, Maud from All in the Family. No. Okay, winning unlikely casting, but I don't know, somehow it worked. B. Arthur was 5'10", you know, big bone woman, but she's mostly funny, although usually the straight person in a lot of the comedy that she was in. Anyway, the film is a little silly, and the guys who are playing Darius and Richard really ham it up. Oh my God. Anyway, it's a very 80s film, very TV film. So, but I recommend checking it out. Maybe I'll share a link with you if you shoot me an email. I don't want to like put it on Blackboard officially because yeah, whatever. I don't want to get in trouble. Um, so they go there. They leave Zeke in the car to be like their getaway driver, and Darius and Richard go in, and they're killed by the matron. After they harass her 12-year-old granddaughter. It's really just compounding their stupidity. And then Zeke falls asleep at the wheel, and at some point, he's pulled out of the car by the matron in full garb with her mask and everything like that, taken inside, and she's about to force him to partake of the flesh of his own brother. When he finally musters up the courage to fight back, and she's taken off her mask, and he punches her, and he gets away and goes to the Averno County Sheriff's Department to let Sheriff Sam Maldonado know what's up. And the following day, the sheriff, who, by the way, such a strange series of coincidences, is the cousin of the 40-year dead Ricardo Crinek Maldonado, shows up with his deputies, and there's a firefight, and eventually the matron is killed. But she first gets accidentally doused with gasoline, and apparently Sheriff Maldonado's last bullet strikes her axe, and the spark lights her on fire. But she doesn't die from that. She dies actually from falling into the stream that flows under the drive, toppling over one edge of it and falling in and drowning. So just a really brutal ending to 40 years of killing, and 83 people. It's a couple of people per year that she was killing on average. um really spooky stuff, and I'm about to spook you out even more, because of course, like a lot of these stories, these uy cucuy uh cuentos de miedo, these scary stories, um the legend continues after the person's dead, right? And so it's been nearly 46 years. But the specter of the matron still kind of, I guess you could say, haunts the minds, at least, of people in the hill country, especially in Averno County, um, where it's said that when there's a cold snap, she's on her way back. Although, okay, and I'm going to warn you, trigger warning, content warning. I'm going to show you a slide. If you want to fast forward a little bit right here, it's kind of gruesome. Um, she's definitely dead. There's a Polaroid taken of her corpse after they pulled her from the water. Um, yeah, she ain't getting up. And it's, whatever. It's spooky season, Halloween, Dia de Muertos, all that good stuff. So thought I'd leave you with the children's rhyme that still exists today. It was originally just sung in Czech, but then, as children lost that, it was translated to English, and that's the way you hear it the most now. And to this day, you can go up to the hill country, to Fayette County, to Averno County, to any of these places, and hear it said, "When snow and dark cover these hills, To slash through homes with a wind that kills. That's the bite of her axe, the chill of her breath. The matron is winter. The matron is death. All right. Till next week. Be safe. Wear your masks. Don't go out unless you need to. COVID's not joking. Matron might not be around, but friggin' COVID is. Take care. God bless.